Well, welcome to the Managing Innovation podcast, and we're delighted today to have with us Faisal Abid, who has got a wealth of experience in the innovation and entrepreneurship field. Amongst many of the things he's done, he spent a long time with Google, working in the technical area and also supporting innovation in Google, and particularly people wanting to take their ideas forward, which Google could help them with. And more recently, he was the founder and is the CTO of a fascinating organization called Eirene, which is a very interesting attempt to disrupt things with innovation in one of the oldest industries in the world. We'll come back to that one in a minute. But first of all, Faisal, thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I wonder, can we start looking back? Could we fly the helicopter very briefly over your timeline? How did you get into innovation? What's been your journey so far?
It's been very fun. I really got started, if you think about it, was probably like when I was in grade 3 or 4, which was really around how I was fascinated by computers, but I was more so fascinated about how programs were built. I remember pirating Photoshop and all these Visual Studio 97 and just off Kazaa and just trying to understand, like, how do I build my own Photoshop or how do I build these things? And that just got me thinking about, it's very cool that you can just, on this keyboard and mouse, be able to build stuff that have these big impacts, whether it's building something as simple as a game or something like Photoshop where millions of people use it. So that got me very interested all throughout elementary. And then high school came along and I got involved in a programming language called Adobe Flex. And this was called Macromedia Flex back in the day, but it was a precursor to Web 2.0 where you were able to take Flash, and instead of using Flash for animation, you were able to build applications on Flash using the Flex framework. And so they called it Rich Internet Applications. It was fantastic, and I ended up helping co-author a book there in like grade 10 or grade 11, which I always loved talking to my English teacher about. I was like, hey, look, I wrote a book. But eventually it got to university. Adobe iPhone came out, kind of killed Flash. And so in university, what I kind of grabbed onto was Android. And Android had just launched when I went to first year university. And I was like, well, where is something I can innovate there? And I would consider that my first startup, where I said, let's find a gap in the Android ecosystem and build for it. And so what I had built was a social marketplace for Android apps. And the idea was, I could turn on the app and I could say, hey, John, I'm seeing you play Angry Birds. You and I are good friends. Would I like Angry Birds? And you would send me a message right there in the app and with a rating saying, no, you're not going to like it because it's not your type of game. Because my original thesis was, sure, a game might be 5 stars, but that doesn't mean I will like it. Every game is a 5 stars. And so eventually the startup did not work out, but that was a very key point in kind of understanding how startups and businesses are built, because there was a lot of things I focused on that I shouldn't have, and a lot of things I didn't focus on, which I should have. And I was like 18 to 21 at this point. So I focused a lot on understanding scaling technology and scaling for like 1 million users, but I didn't even have 2 users to scale up. Right? I didn't focus at all on distribution. I didn't focus on marketing. I thought if I build it, they'll come, which is complete nonsense. Does not happen. But that was a very interesting learning experience for me. And so I had a choice. Actually, what I didn't say was I dropped out of second year university to pursue this business. To the much dismay of my parents, who were like, oh my gosh. But I told them I would go back. I still haven't yet. But what happened was I had a choice. When the business was winding down, because we had taken on some money, a very small amount of money, and I was paying myself like $200 a month. And that's how we were getting by, where luckily I had a chance to, I was living with my parents, so I wasn't homeless or anything. But so that's what was happening. And then I'm like, okay, I have a chance now. I can go back to school and complete my education, or and I was at McMaster doing software engineering degree, or the bet that I made was if I go back, then what I realized is university and schools, while absolutely fantastic, and I don't recommend anyone drop out, it's that they're always 2 or 3 years behind when in their teaching of technology. So aside from the exceptions, they're always 2, 3 years behind. And so when you join the workforce, you're always at a disadvantage unless you've taken the time on your own to learn a lot of skill sets.
Yeah.
And so I said, if I go that way, this path, then I'm already in this channel where I'm meeting with tech entrepreneurs every day. I know what's on the horizon. I know what's hot right now. So why don't I just focus on this and somehow get a job? And so I went to university. I went to McMaster, and I told the professor I made a mistake. I shouldn't have dropped out. And then I left McMaster, came back downtown Toronto, and then I just applied on LinkedIn to a bunch of jobs. I didn't look at which job I was applying to. I just applied to a bunch. I applied to LinkedIn, applied to Twitch, applied to a bunch. I got a call back from all of them asking me hey, we'll fly you down, etc. But I didn't want to leave Toronto also. And that was a bet number 2 that I made, which was the idea was I could go to Silicon Valley or San Francisco, and I would be one of thousands of engineers who are at that point were there doing lots of work, or Toronto, which was such a small community that we weren't really on the map for technology yet. Mm-hmm. And so the bet was, it's already popular there. Why don't I try to make an impact in a smaller community that's very interesting, very diverse, a lot of interesting people here. And so that's what ended up happening, where I ended up taking a job at a Canadian tech company called Kobo. And that was really interesting because I got to work on hardware, software, everything. And so that kind of propelled me. I started meeting a lot of interesting people. I did a lot of startups because what I didn't want to focus on was going to like an enterprise company like a Google or a Microsoft. Despite Google often had in the mid like 2015, multiple times like engineering managers have reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to work for us?" I said no. I wanted to work for smaller startups. So specifically because my third bet was I didn't want to get too focused on one piece of technology, right? Mm-hmm. Because the second I focus on, say, all I do is Android and nothing but Android, that puts me at a disadvantage as technology continues to change. And there will be something else where I'm like, well, crap, I don't know any of those concepts because I've been too focused on mobile concepts. Mm-hmm. And so eventually what happened was Google asked me to become a Google developer expert, which means that I get to continue my job doing whatever, but I also am an evangelist for Google where I can go around giving talks on Google's behalf, talking about new technologies coming out, like even on this podcast, right? Talking about AI and all that stuff. But at the same time, I am not tied to Google. I'm not like a Google employee, but I get into all these Google programs. So, helping startups and learning from startups. There was a whole startup program for Google where I got to mentor a bunch of interesting startups and help them use Google's innovative products. So that's what happened till the crypto boom happened. I did some stuff in crypto, which was a scam. Like crypto was such a scam that I was like, I was so sold by crypto being something very interesting. From the DeFi part is very interesting, but the actual coin stuff, I was so sold back in 2016 that something would happen that I started building a lot of apps in using the coins. But then I'm like, you know what? Like this industry, the DeFi part is great, but the coins part is just a scam. So I got out of that. And then eventually, I stumbled upon this idea of Eirene where I was in Japan and I saw that they were dealing with death in a very different way than North America does. They had like an online marketplace for death. And one of the things that I learned from running all these businesses on the side or even like startups before was either I have domain expertise in the business, like I understand I understand development software super well, or I'm working with someone that understands it. That's the only way a business can work. And so I learned about the death industry, and I didn't I love the idea, but I love the idea, but I knew that I couldn't give it justice because I didn't understand the other side of the industry. I wasn't a funeral director. I didn't understand how funeral homes work. What I knew was I can revolutionize the industry using technology. So I put the idea in the back burner along with a million other ideas I had until I ran into by pure coincidence, my business partner, co-founder now, Mallory. She was a daughter of a funeral director. She was also thinking about doing something in death. And so there was that synergy of, hey, you understand the funeral home world. I understand the tech world. Let's build a technology company. And the first product is going to be cremation. So in a nutshell, that's how my journey from like dropping out to just doing all these different startups, being part of early stage startups and just learning all sorts of new things without trying to be a domain expert in any one of things has kind of got me this far so far.
Wow, that's already an amazing story, and thanks for sharing that. I guess a couple of things that rang for me. You used that word learning many, many times, and you could say, in very, very carefully inverted commas, your first attempt was a failure, as in...
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Many attempts have been failing.
Yeah. But that, I mean, and we know this now, that's not a bad thing as long as you learn. There's nothing wrong with failing if you learn from it and you don't make the same mistakes twice. So I wonder, could you just comment a little bit more on that experience and what you then were able to pass on as a mentor when you were doing some of the Google developer stuff?
Like my biggest mistake for that first business was we spent way too long to launch. I had we had started this business, me and my business partner at that time. We started the business in, say, September when Android launched, right? But it took us 2 years to launch. Why? Because the technology had been built, but we started thinking of new features to add. We started thinking of new ideas. We got stuck in this perpetual feedback loop of, hey, you know what would be great we can add? We know what would be great we can add. And yes, there was some investor interest, but we never got so far as to properly think about marketing and all that stuff, where it took us too long to launch. Compare that to my other businesses, including Eirene in a lot of ways, where I would have the idea, say, month 1, I am launching this product in like month 3, the most bare bones version of this product, just so I can see, is this an idea worth pursuing? With Eirene, it was a lot of the same, where after me and my business partner met, Mallory and I said, okay, let's build it. We built it. We wanted to launch it. There was a regulatory pushback, but that was different. The product was built. It was basically sitting there for multiple months, waiting for approval from the licensing committee. But that was an exception. The product was built, and we had beta tested it in the way where we had shown it to potential customers and families who had recently lost people and said, would you have used Eirene if you were given a choice? So there was a lot of feedback that was given till we were able to launch. So the same stuff I've passed on to so many entrepreneurs, where it's like, I know it's very easy to fall in the trap of it has to be perfect. You have to have a grand party or something when you launch it. Like when Eirene launched, it was me and my business partner. We met. We're like, we have to at least try to get one family this month to use the Eirene services. Right? That was it. There wasn't any grand, like we still haven't properly ever had like a party that we've launched. It's just that the focus has to be on how do we make the product better? How do we get feedback? And then in that iterative cycle, keep looping till I guess you built a business one day. I mean, that's what it is.
That's amazing. And I guess what that also makes me think of is you've learned enough lessons for a conventional startup and you can pass that advice on. If I look at Eirene, as far as I can deduce, this is pretty dramatic stuff, and it's going up against an established industry. This is something that very much fits what I understand as disruptive innovation. This is a newcomer coming with a different technology, a completely different approach. A couple of the labels I've seen on articles, there's a lovely one. You're trying to become the Uber of funerals, which is an interesting one, or the digitalization of death care. But essentially, these are dramatic phrases, but they imply you're not just trying to do another software startup in the games area. This is a big challenge to something that already exists. Could you talk us through a little bit about, did you see that as a challenge? How you've managed to steer through that? You've already mentioned regulators, and I can imagine that's a challenge, but could you talk a little bit about that, the whole disruptive idea?
My idea has always been in my career so far is if we're going to do something, let's try to do something very interesting that isn't a quick win. Like many times I've thought about simple stuff where I'm like, I should just launch like a PDF, a chatbot that talks to a PDF, right? And that is very cool. But is it disruptive enough where it is an idea worth doing? Am I excited about it when I wake up, right? And so the past 10 years, I'm 33 now, since 21 when I got into my first job, it's been a lot of going back and forth on, I'm going to try this idea, but is this actually an interesting enough idea? I'm going to attempt this. No, this problem doesn't work. So it was all about finding the right disruptive category. There's even the companies I've worked at, Kobo, League, Zoom.ai were three companies that I worked at. Kobo was disrupting the ebook space. It was going head on against Amazon Kindle. League was trying to disrupt health insurance and health and wellness. So the idea, and then Zoom was trying to become ChatGPT back in 2017. When I joined all these companies, it was, this is very interesting, and I'm joining at a much lower salary, employee number 3 or 4, trying to understand how a successful founder can build a business in a disruptive category. Those are the lessons I kind of taken and learned from each one of those businesses. Good and bad lessons for all of them, because there's always good and bad, where I've been able to apply to Eirene. So when Eirene came along and Mallory and I were like, okay, let's start this business, it wasn't like, well, how do we get a quick win? It was more so we're building, this is a very disruptive category. Not a lot of people are even thinking about this category, let alone building a technology business in it. How can we leverage the skill sets we've learned from tech businesses that we've worked at and build a tech business that the idea wasn't let's build a funeral home business with some technology. The idea was let's build a tech business with tech business fundamentals, right? Let's build everything automated. Let's try to be agile, sprints, all this stuff, like everything. But the first product is selling cremations, right? And so by thinking about it that way, we were able to actually innovate. And what Eirene is now is a lot of innovation. The consumer, very easy process for the consumer. The consumer can call us 24/7, go to Eirene, and have the whole flow from the safety of their home. They don't have to go price shopping or anywhere driving around funeral homes. The back end, we built a system called Funeral OS that's able to analyze all phone calls, extract all relevant information, pass that over to the funeral director, so the funeral director can just review all this information. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened because that's what tech companies do. We innovate and we try to disrupt a category. So that's always been my theory of let's do something worthwhile. that is disruptive versus build another Snapchat filter or something.
That's fascinating. And I guess the question I've got coming back from the theory of disruptive innovation, it's not so much the innovation, the technology, it's the fact that it's a completely different kind of value network. And
Yes.
in something as old as the funeral business, that network is really entrenched. It's got regulators, it's got many other players. It's, I wouldn't say it's vested interest, but it's a kind of very hard thing to crack. And
Yes.
I'm just wondering, what you're really effectively doing is replacing that with a much more effective network. But that can't have been an easy process in the early stages.
The idea was simple. It was the industry hasn't changed in a long time, but people have changed. We fundamentally are different people than people that lived 100 years ago, but the industry is the exact same as 100 years ago, right? And so, as that article wrote, Uber for funerals. While I never like to use it because that makes it sound so crude, but if you think about Uber, the taxi industry had fundamentally been the same since whenever taxi industry was created, right? You either hailed a taxi or you gave them a call, but everyone was on a cell phone. Yeah. Why did it make sense to call someone where you could actually see where the car is and use algorithms to figure out who the nearest driver is? And so Eirene is similar in a lot of ways where it was the industry hasn't changed, but people have changed. People's behaviors with technology and the relationship with technology has changed. So how can we leverage that learning that people have and build something that suits them? Ultimately, we always have to do right by the consumer, and that's what we care about. Yeah. So if the customer is in a different paradigm shift altogether, then we should build a product for a customer that suits their needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because I guess particularly in something like the funeral business, it's a tremendously difficult emotional time for anyone, and therefore it's classically one where the human touch is so important. What I read from your website and some of the testimonials is that you haven't lost that. You've kept that human front end, the empathy, all the other things which are so important. What you have done is radically rethink the back end, which...
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the technology has made a lot of people isolated. However, technology is also a huge connecting factor. I can connect with anywhere in the world. I'm connecting with you in the UK. We would have never been able to do this 20 years ago, right? 25 years ago, it would have been very difficult, and 50 years ago, forget about it. And so it has opened us up to better connections. So the idea that Eirene being a tech company is losing the human touch, I find it funny because you can call us 24/7. You can chat with us. You have funeral directors ready to talk to you at any point. So there's still a powerful human connection that we've enabled because of technology.
Yeah. Given your experience in doing this, which I find quite challenging, quite impressive, I think there may be other sectors, I'm thinking particularly in healthcare, which again has a lot of resistance to change. You know, we might see some of the whizzy robot surgery and so on, but actually the system is quite resistant and quite self-referencing. Can you see other spaces, as you were looking, when you said when you were looking at the funeral business, can you see other spaces where that kind of thinking that you brought to the funeral business could be applied?
I mean, I recently ran into an entrepreneur that was building drones to clean large industrial assets. And I was like, what does that even mean? And the disruptive business there is there's pipelines, there's these like companies like refineries with huge like buildings with like oil drums or whatever. And right now, every month, they have to bring in experts to climb up, look at all the steel and whatever it's made out of closely, repair, or what this individual is doing is building a drone that has all the sensors built in that can fly up, do a close scan, use LiDAR or whatever they're doing to understand if this needs a repair, do a little paint job, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's, when Eirene came, when we started Eirene, I thought about this a lot. I'm like, are there any other industries left, or is somehow funeral industry the only one? And I'm wrong. There's so many industries left. Hospitals, definitely, the whole medical system, but just the most mundane stuff that we all take advantage of. There's definitely stuff there. Just the fact that this person told me about this large industrial asset, I was like, oh wow, I didn't even think about this. The key thing here is you have to be immersed or work with someone who understands the industry. I think the superpower that entrepreneurs have is the ability to learn very quickly. And so whether you're an engineer or whether you're not an engineer, you can quickly, talk to friends, reach out on LinkedIn. Again, internet is very powerful, and just try to find people. If you think there's an industry in mining, for example, gold mining, I'm just coming up with that, then reach out to 50 different gold miners and start asking them about their day-to-day tasks. Start asking them about what do they do. And so as you try to get immersed in an industry, you'll start to see there's problems there. Eirene didn't start with the vision of solving all of funeral care. We know Eirene is not for 100% of users. Eirene is for a large majority of people that prefer cremation, that are okay with using technology, but that's okay because that's a large enough market. I think the fallacy that a lot of entrepreneurs have is we want to be the next Google or Microsoft. But if you look at all these companies, they also didn't start with trying to do everything for everyone, right? They started with one thing, which was Windows or a search engine or XYZ. And then as they made money, they got to do something with their money, so they just started investing. So when you talk to people in certain industries, don't try to think about revolutionizing the industry. Try to think about how can I solve their pain point, and as you solve, and if that pain point is powerful enough that you can actually make a business out of it.
Yeah. That's several very good pieces of advice there. I think particularly this understand the industry, that it's a context. It's not just a whizzy technology. Yeah. And then I think that start with the focus and then extend. But I'm afraid all this talk of technology and the fact that you clearly are a great opportunity spotter, I have to ask you about AI.
Sure.
I'll be one of the millions of people who are asking, I'm sure. But can you talk us through a little bit about where you see the real opportunity space in what is obviously a rapidly shifting, huge field?
It is. Actually, AI is actually very disruptive. AI on its own, if you are thinking about, let's build an AI app where I can, get AI to do something, then, like, for example, my comment about getting a PDF, asking AI to answer questions from a PDF, or summarizing a YouTube video. These are not businesses. These are cool little gimmicks that you have no moat. What AI is going to do is AI is going to help you basically build a moat in your business, but AI should not be the business. So, for example, if AI is the business, then you're going up against Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, AWS, Hugging Face, all these guys, because you need a bunch of dollars, a bunch of GPUs, and train a lot of data. Or you can leverage that AI system and find a problem, whether it's in funerals tech or AI, mining or healthcare, and leverage that AI to solve that problem better. That is what AI is good for. There's a lot of hype around AI can do A and AI can do B, where specifically when we talk about AI in this context is large language models. But even if you're talking about AI outside of large language models, you're not going to be able, unless you have some deep research experience and a lot of money through Google or these guys, be able to create a new form of AI. So that endeavor is kind of pointless. What you need to be able to do is look at an industry and say, how can I apply AI to this specific industry to make it better?
Yeah.
So I'll give you in our context. As part of Funeral OS, there's so much AI that runs in the background, whether it's large language models or whether it's prediction AI, understanding how our ad spend's going. We built internal AI to optimize our website, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot. That's what we've been able to do specifically in the funeral spaces context. That is how Eirene is able to move so much faster, because a lot of other funeral homes don't understand technology, and so that is our moat. We understand technology because we're technologists. So if you take a look at any other industries, anytime you apply AI, if you apply it correctly in an industry, you'll be able to so much faster and build a moat there.
Yeah. That is fascinating. And it does come back again to what you said a moment ago. Understand the context. It's not the technology.
It's not technology.
Yeah.
It never is the technology. Like, there's so many cool demos. If you go to Hugging Face has a website called Spaces, and a section called Spaces. And there's so many cool demos of people cloning voices, people deep faking videos, and all sorts of stuff. And if technology was the business, each one of those would be $1 billion valuation.
Yeah.
But they're not. You have to understand, how do I take this technology and actually make a business out of it that actually solves a problem?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it reminds me, there was a company back in the day that built like a juicer machine that was like a subscription model where you had to buy juice packs and all this stuff. It's been studied a lot by HBR and a bunch of other stuff. That wasn't solving anyone's problem. That was just a cool tech. I think that's very cool from a technology standpoint, which is an IoT machine with DRM packs and all of this sorts of stuff. But what problem is that solving? Yeah. So you need to actually take that and go, I'm going to solve a problem that is big enough where I can charge money. If you don't charge money for it, then it's not a business, and you're just wasting your time and your potential opportunity cost.
Fantastic. Faisal, we're running slowly out of time, but perhaps I could ask one last question.
Yes.
And although you're still a very early stage, 33, you've still got a long career ahead of you in all of this. You've accumulated a lot of knowledge the hard way. You've done it and you've learned by doing. That's fantastic. If you were now talking to perhaps some of my students who are sort of still thinking, I'd like to be an entrepreneur, I've got a good idea, what wisdom would Uncle Faisal pass on to them? Any sort of any gems for them?
I'd iterate fast. Like Uncle Faisal would say, iterate very, very fast. Don't spend too long obsessing about perfecting it. The idea should be, you get it to a good state, you launch it. If it falls flat on its face, understand why. I think the asking at every step of the way, why is it not working, is very important. It could be that you just did a really bad job at the MVP, or it could be that you actually don't have a business here. So you need to really ask yourself why and keep iterating really, really fast.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of throw it away, but it is about iterating and pivoting and keeping that process going.
Yeah, you can start from idea A and end up at idea Z in a span of 12 months, or you can be stuck at idea A and not know if idea B to Z were going to work. So it's very important. You should iterate very fast. And every successful entrepreneur that I've spoken to has done that. Anytime I ask any entrepreneur who just had like a massive exit or has built a great business, I will say, well, hey, can you give me some advice on like what I should be doing? And they're like, velocity is very important. Keep moving fast and keep trying new things and learning from each time something doesn't work.
Lovely. Faisal, thank you so much. That's really rich with great ideas and great examples. Really appreciate that. If people want to know more, particularly about Eirene, they can find more on the website, and we'll put some details at the end of the podcast. But for now, Faisal, thank you so much for your time. Really value that. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Thanks.